In Humankind, an era that represents levels of advancement your empire has experienced. All empires start in the Neolithic era, and they will progress towards the final contemporary era. Every era contains new cultures to adopt, new events to experience, new technologies to research, new wonders to build, and plenty of fame for your empire to obtain. List of eras. There are a total of 7 eras in Humankind, ranging from the Neolithic era to the contemporary era. All empires will advance through the eras at their own pace, meaning that some will be more advanced than others. 1. Neolithic era. 2. Ancient era. 3. Classical era. 4. Medieval era. 5. Early modern era. 6. Industrial era. 7. Contemporary era. We will have deeper look at each of these 7 eras in the second half of the video, but for now let's continue the overview with a section on era stars. Every new era comes with up to 21 era stars that the empires may obtain by completing various objectives, which are based on the 7 culture affinities. Upon finishing an objective, the empire will be awarded with an era star and fame. These objectives are specific to each empire. If an empire achieves one, it will not impact the objectives of other empires. In order to advance to a new era, an empire requires at least 7 era stars. If the player wishes to do so, they may remain in the era for longer to gain additional fame from the era's objectives, although they will not benefit from more era stars. Cultures. Every empire will start off the game as a nomadic tribe. At the end of every era, empires may choose to adopt a new culture or transcend the current one that they have. Every era contains multiple unique cultures that the empire may adopt, all of which have different legacy traits, emblematic districts, and emblematic units. Once a culture is claimed by an empire, no other empires may adopt that culture. If you lag behind in era advancement, you could end up missing a desired culture. You may want to advance through the eras faster so that you can get the first culture. Events. Narrative events can occur during gameplay and can impact your empire and its ideology, as well as giving various bonuses and statuses to your cities and units. All events are specific to only 1 or 2 eras. When you advance to a new era, you may encounter many new events and will no longer be able to experience most events of the previous era. Technologies. Technologies may be researched with science, unlocking new districts, units, infrastructure, and more. Usually, empires are only capable of researching technologies from the era that they are currently in, so an empire will be forced to advance if they wish to research advanced technologies. Only scientist cultures are capable of researching future technologies 1 era ahead. Cultural wonders. Starting from the ancient era, every new era that your empire progresses to will also unlock several new cultural wonders that your empire may now build. These magnificent wonders grant powerful abilities, as well as a large amount of fame. Before an empire may build a cultural wonder, it must be claimed using influence. Once a cultural wonder is claimed, no other empire may build them. Now we will examine each individual era in more detail, including which cultures you can choose in each era, which technologies will be available to you, and which wonders you may be lucky enough to claim and build. Neolithic Era. The Neolithic Era is one of the eras in Humankind. In a new game, every empire starts in this era with a hunting party. This nomadic tribe is a single unit that needs to collect 20 food to multiply itself. To unlock the ability to select a culture among 10 in the next era, Ancient Era, you have to get 1 era star. After the culture is chosen, the era transition will accrue in between this and the next turn. In-game description. During this period, Humankind began its transition from a hunter-gatherer lifestyle to a more sedentary, less nomadic way of life. As you can see here, the only culture available in this era is the nomadic tribe. Obtainable era stars. Growth star. Have 5 population and/or units within your empire. Fame gained from completing this era star starts at 100 fame and decays every turn. Knowledge star. Accrue 10 science knowledge. Discover curiosities to improve your tribe's understanding of the world. By accruing 10 knowledge, a legacy trait could be chosen. 10 knowledge will be converted into science in the next era. Fame gained from completing this era star starts at 100 fame and decays every turn. Hunter star. Hunt a total of 5 animal units. Fame gained from completing this era star starts at 100 fame and decays every turn. Ancient Era. Ancient Era is one of the eras in Humankind. When entering this era, the player can choose between 10 cultures. After the culture is chosen, the era transition will accrue in between this and the next turn. The Ancient Era unlocks the ability to build cities, research technologies, create a religion, and so on. In this era, Two new strategic resources, horse, copper, are available after researching the corresponding technologies. To progress to the next era, the player has to collect 7 of the 21 era stars. The previous era is the Neolithic Era. The next era is the Classical Era. In-game description, marked by the large-scale smelting of bronze, as well as the beginnings of urbanization and widespread use of the wheel and plow. Here is the complete list of ancient era cultures it is possible to choose and play as well as each culture's affinity. Assyrians, expansionist. Babylonians, scientists. Egyptians, builders. Harappans, agrarian. Hittites, militarist. Mycenaeans, militarist. Nubians, merchants. Olmecs, aesthete. Phoenicians, merchants. Jew, aesthete. Here is the list of technologies available to a budding civilization during the ancient era and any pre-required technologies you may need to unlock these. Calendar. Domestication. Carpentry. City defense. Irrigation. Pre-required technologies are calendar and domestication. Fishing. Pre-required technologies are carpentry. Masonry. Pre-required technologies are carpentry. Bronze working. Pre-required technologies are city defense. Writing. Pre-required technologies are calendar. Wheel. Pre-required technologies are carpentry and domestication. Sailing. Pre-required technologies are fishing. Organized warfare. Pre-required technologies are bronze working and masonry. And lastly, a list of available ancient era wonders. Pyramid of Giza. Hanging Gardens of Babylon. Stonehenge. Temple of Artemis. Classical Era. Classical Era is one of the eras in humankind. When entering this era, the player can choose between 10 cultures. After the culture is chosen, the era transition will accrue in between this and the next turn. In this era, a new strategic resource, iron, is available after researching the corresponding technologies. To progress to the next era, the player has to collect 7 of the 21 era stars. The previous era is the ancient era. The next era is the medieval era. In-game description, marked by the large-scale smelting of iron, as well as the rapid growth of trade along with advances in mathematics and science. Here is the list of classical era cultures and their various affinities. Achaemenid Persians, expansionist. Axumites, merchant. Carthaginians, merchant. Celts, agrarian. Goths, militarist. Greeks, scientist. Huns, militarist. Mauryans, aesthete. Maya, builder. Romans, expansionist. Here's the list of classical era technologies and any pre-required technologies you will need to use them. Philosophy. Pre-required technologies are writing. Hydrology. Pre-required technologies are irrigation and wheel trade expeditions. Pre-required technologies and sailing, wheel. Fortifications. Pre-required technologies are organized warfare. Standing army. Pre-required technologies are bronze working. Rhetoric. Pre-required technologies are philosophy. Conquest. Pre-required technologies are standing army. Craftsmanship. Pre-required technologies are trade expeditions. Mounted warfare. Pre-required technologies are standing army. Foreign outposts. Pre-required technologies are trade expeditions and conquest. Imperial power. Pre-required technologies are conquest. Siege tactics. Pre-required technologies are conquest. And finally, the classical era wonders. Colossus of Rhodes. Lighthouse of Alexandria. Mausoleum at Halicarnassus. Statue of Zeus. Medieval era. Medieval era is one of the eras in humankind. When entering this era, the player can choose between 10 cultures. After the culture is chosen, the era transition will accrue in between this and the next turn. To progress to the next era, the player has to collect 7 of the 21 era stars. The previous era is the classical era. The next era is the early modern era. In-game motto, marked by stunning architectural achievements, chivalry, large-scale migrations, the growth of state religions, feudalism, and an acceleration in military technology. The complete list of medieval era cultures and their affinities. Aztecs, militarist. Byzantines, merchant. English, agrarian. Franks, aesthete. Ghanaians, merchant. Khmer, builder. Mongols, militarist. Norsemen, militarist. Teutons, expansionist. Umayyads, scientist. Now, the list of classical era technologies and any pre-required technologies you will need to use them. Medieval era technologies. Theology. Pre-required technologies are rhetoric. Feudalism. Pre-required technologies are imperial power. War summons. Pre-required technologies are imperial power. Seafaring mastery. Pre-required technologies are foreign outposts. Chivalry. Pre-required technologies are feudalism. Heavy infantry, pre-required technologies are war summons. Military architecture, pre-required technologies are siege tactics and war summons. Alchemy, pre-required technologies are theology. Guilds, pre-required technologies are feudalism and seafaring mastery. Furnace steel, pre-required technologies are chivalry and heavy infantry. Medieval era wonders. Angkor Wat, Forbidden City, Notre Dame, which is DLC. Tmdai. Early modern era. Early modern era is one of the eras in humankind. When entering this era, the player can choose between 10 cultures. After the culture is chosen, the era transition will accrue in between this and the next turn. In this era, a new strategic resource, Saltpeter, is available after researching the corresponding technologies. To progress to the next era, the player has to collect 7 of the 21 era stars. The previous era is the medieval era. The next era is the industrial era. In-game motto, marked by renewed interest in science and technology, increased exploration and international commerce, growth in the fine arts, and the large-scale adoption of gunpowder. The early modern era cultures and affinities. Dutch, merchant. Edo-Japanese, aesthete. Haudenosaunee, agrarian. Joseon, scientist. Ming, aesthete. Muls, builder. Ottomans, expansionist. Poles, militarist. Spanish, expansionist. Venetians, merchant. Early modern era technologies and pre-required technologies. Three-masted ship, pre-required technologies are seafaring mastery. Naval artillery, pre-required technologies are seafaring mastery. Centralized power, pre-required technologies are guilds and furnace steel and chivalry. Gunpowder warfare, pre-required technologies are furnace steel and military architecture. Movable typeface, pre-required technologies are alchemy and three-masted ship. Chartered companies, pre-required technologies are naval artillery and three-masted ship. Patronage, pre-required technologies are centralized power. Supply lines, pre-required technologies are centralized power. Siege cannons, pre-required technologies are gunpowder warfare. Mercantilism, pre-required technologies are chartered companies and patronage. Flintlock, pre-required technologies are supply lines and siege cannons. Early modern era wonders. Machu Picchu. St. Basil's Cathedral. Taj Mahal. Topkapi Palace. Industrial era. Industrial era is one of the eras in humankind. When entering this era, the player can choose between 10 cultures. After the culture is chosen, the era transition will accrue in between this and the next turn. In this era, 2 new strategic resources, coal and oil, are available after researching the corresponding technologies. To progress to the next era, the player has to collect 7 of the 21 era stars. The previous era is the early modern era. The next era is the contemporary era. In-game motto, marked by the shift from an agrarian to an urban lifestyle, mass production, and the widespread use of coal, steel, and the steam engine. Industrial era cultures and affinities. Austro-Hungarians, aesthete. British, expansionist. French, scientist. Germans, militarist. Italians, aesthete. Mexicans, agrarian. Persians, builder. Russians, expansionist. Siamese, builder. Zulu, militarist. Industrial era technologies and pre-required technologies. Encyclopedia, pre-required technologies are movable typeface. Carbine, pre-required technologies are flintlock. Steam engine, pre-required technologies are an encyclopedia and movable typeface. Military coordination, pre-required technologies are flintlock. Scientific method, pre-required technologies are encyclopedia and steam engine. Nationhood, pre-required technologies are encyclopedia. Line formation, pre-required technologies are carbine and military coordination. Propeller, pre-required technologies are steam engine. Mechanization, pre-required technologies are steam engine and scientific method. Electricity, pre-required technologies are scientific method and nationhood. Combustion engine, pre-required technologies are propeller and mechanization. Microbiology, pre-required technologies are scientific method. Urban planning, pre-required technologies are electricity. Guerrilla warfare, pre-required technologies are nationhood. Aeronautics, pre-required technologies are combustion engine. Wireless telegraphy, pre-required technologies are electricity. Trench warfare, pre-required technologies are guerrilla warfare and line formation. Industrial era wonders. Statue of Liberty. Big Ben. Eiffel Tower. Contemporary era. Contemporary era is the last of the eras in humankind. When entering this era, the player can choose between 10 cultures. After the culture is chosen, the era transition will accrue in between this and the next turn. In this era, two new strategic resources, aluminium and uranium, are available after researching the corresponding technologies. The previous era is the industrial era. In-game motto, marked by sharp growth in the discovery and exploitation of technologies in every facet of life: transportation, communication, agriculture, politics, finance and economics. Contemporary era cultures and their affinities. Americans, expansionist. Australians, builder. Brazilians, agrarian. Chinese, merchant. Egyptians, contemporary, aesthete. Indians, aesthete. Japanese, scientist. Soviets, expansionist. Swedes, scientist. Turks, agrarian. The full list of contemporary era technologies and pre-required technologies. We are almost finished saying pre-required technologies. They don't pay me enough. Aerial warfare, pre-required technologies are aeronautics. Research Institute, no pre-required technologies. Continuous track, pre-required technologies are combustion engine. Naval air strategy, pre-required technologies are combustion engine and wireless telegraphy. Amphibious warfare, pre-required technologies are trench warfare. Radar, pre-required technologies are aerial warfare. Civil engineering, pre-required technologies are urban planning. Insurrection theory, pre-required technologies are amphibious warfare. Uranium enrichment, pre-required technologies are research institute. Free trade agreement, pre-required technologies are wireless telegraphy and civil engineering. Computing, pre-required technologies are naval air strategy and radar. Power lines, pre-required technologies are urban planning. Nuclear fission, pre-required technologies are uranium enrichment. Social housing, pre-required technologies are power lines. Suburbs, pre-required technologies are free trade agreement and civil engineering and power lines. Rocket science, pre-required technologies are radar. Renewable energy, pre-required technologies are suburbs and mechanized harvesting. Communication satellites, pre-required technologies are rocket science and computing. Mass entertainment, pre-required technologies are suburbs and social housing. Covert ops, pre-required technologies are communication satellites. World Wide Web, pre-required technologies are communication satellites and mass entertainment. Space orbital, pre-required technologies are fighter jets. Neural implant, pre-required technologies are World Wide Web. Exosuit, pre-required technologies are composite armor. Military laser, pre-required technologies are covert ops. Fusion reactor, pre-required technologies are nuclear fission. Composite armor, pre-required technologies are continuous track. Automation, pre-required technologies are computing and mechanized harvesting. Mechanized harvesting, pre-required technologies are free trade agreement and suburbs. Fighter jets, pre-required technologies are radar and rocket science. Contemporary era wonders. Empire State Building. Sydney Opera House. Christ the Redeemer. Well guys, that's the end of the video. Thanks for watching and keep conquering. Don't forget to subscribe for more videos like this one.